I still remember the moment she walked out of our lives, like a shadow fading from a picture I had once thought permanent. The morning was sharp, the winter air cutting through the cracks of the old house, and I could hear the soft whimpering of my son, Eli, from his room. He was just 8, his world already fragile, colored by routines and small comforts. And yet in that fragile world he had me, and I had him. She, my wife of 10 years, looked at us one last time. There was no anger in her eyes, no hesitation. Just a strange emptiness that I had never seen before, a cold clarity. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. And then she left. No goodbye to Eli, no explanation beyond those 4 haunting words. I knelt beside Eli, his small hands clutching the edge of his blanket. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, though my chest burned with disbelief and betrayal. How could someone abandon their own child, someone so vulnerable, for reasons I couldn't yet understand? The house felt unbearably quiet after she left, the silence pressing against me with a weight I couldn't shake. Weeks turned into months. Bills piled up, the nights stretched longer, and every small victory with Eli, his laughter during a new game, his excitement at spotting a bird outside the window, became my fragile lifeline. But beneath it all, a shadow grew in my chest, one I tried to ignore: resentment. Betrayal, the sense that life had cheated me, and worse, that she could walk away with nothing while we suffered. Then, almost a year later, she came back, not with apologies, not with remorse, but with ambition. The first words she uttered when I opened the door were not about missing Eli or explaining her absence. They were about money. $3.9 million. The inheritance she claimed, or so she said, for the child she had abandoned without a thought. I stood there, silent. Eli clung to my leg, his small body trembling not from cold, but from sensing the storm in my eyes. I could feel my pulse racing, not out of fear, but calculation. I had spent every day since she left observing, learning, understanding the subtle patterns in her behavior. And now she had returned, expecting that the past could be brushed aside, expecting that my son's love, fragile and unwavering, could be a bridge for her greed. I invited her in, keeping my face calm, my voice even. "Come in," I said, every word measured, every movement deliberate. There would be no outburst, no impulsive reaction. This time I had control. This time I had a plan. And as she stepped into the living room, I watched her, noting the faint perfume she always wore, the nervous tap of her foot, the way she avoided Eli's eyes. She thought she could manipulate him, use him as a ticket back into our lives and into that money. She was wrong. The game had just begun, and I had all the pieces. I watched her settle onto the couch, her posture tight, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. She tried to smile to soften the tension, but it was forced. Fragile, like the cracks in the life she had abandoned. Eli sat across from her on the floor, his small fingers tracing the edges of his toy blocks, eyes wide and cautious. He didn't speak, but I could feel his confusion radiating in tiny waves through the room. I know I left," she started, her voice trembling slightly as if rehearsed. "But things were hard. I had to think about my future." Her words dripped with calculated remorse, but I had seen enough to recognize the performance. The actress in her had always been sharp, charming, convincing. But charm could not erase truth, nor could it undo the damage she had caused. I remained silent. My calmness was deliberate, a wall she could not breach. She needed to feel that control had shifted, that she was now stepping into my world on my terms, and slowly I began to probe. "Do you even know what you missed?" I asked, my voice low, steady, but carrying an edge that made her flinch. Her eyes darted to Eli, and for a moment I thought she might break, might reveal the emptiness behind her coldness. But no, she clutched her purse tighter and nodded. I know I missed a lot. I want to make it right, for him." I could see the lie wrapped in every syllable. She didn't care about Eli, not really. She cared about the inheritance, about the ease of stepping back into a life she had abandoned. I felt a surge of hatred rise in my chest, the kind that was silent, patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For days, I observed her interactions with Eli. Each smile she forced, each gesture of fake affection I catalogued. I noted the moments she slipped, the micro-expressions of greed that flickered across her face when she thought no one was watching. Every lie, every omission became a piece of the puzzle I would use. Then came the day I decided to set the first trap. It was subtle, almost invisible, like the slow tightening of a noose. I invited her to review Eli's finances, the trust fund set aside for him, all legally and meticulously documented. Her eyes lit up at the numbers, the very sum she had come for, $3.9 million. I watched as her fingers hovered over the paperwork, her expression a mixture of triumph and panic. "Everything is here," I said calmly, my hands folded in front of me. "Every cent accounted for. The question is, are you here for him or for this?" My tone was soft, almost conversational, but every word cut through the veneer of her composure. Her response was a stuttered excuse, thin and trembling. But I could see the truth in the way her eyes darted to the pile of papers, not to Eli. She wanted the money. Nothing else mattered, and at that moment I knew the path ahead would require patience, precision, and a careful orchestration of events. She had underestimated me, underestimated the depth of my resolve, and most importantly, underestimated the love I had for my son. Eli's trust and security would be my shield. My revenge would not be impulsive, it would be inevitable. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling the scent of the room, the faint notes of her perfume mixed with the lingering warmth of the house that had been ours before her betrayal. Every detail, every nuance would be used, and as I exhaled, I allowed myself a small, controlled smile. She thought she was returning to what she had lost, but she had stepped into a game she could not win. The next morning, I watched her from the kitchen, pretending to prepare Eli's breakfast, while my mind worked like a machine, cold, methodical, calculating. She moved through the living room, carefully watching every corner, every picture on the wall, every small token of our shared life. Her steps were cautious, almost reverent, but I could see through it. This was not remorse, it was reconnaissance. She was assessing what she had lost, sizing up the battlefield before making her move. I decided to give her a taste of what her return meant. "Eli has a therapy session today," I mentioned casually, as if it were a mundane fact. Her eyes flickered, and for a moment she looked like she had forgotten herself. "Do you want to come?" I asked. The invitation was simple, almost innocent, but layered with intent. She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, I want to be there for him." The session began, and I observed her closely. The therapist's office was quiet, sun spilling across the floor in long, warm beams. Eli sat on the mat, his fingers tracing the texture of his toys, eyes focused and serene. She leaned forward, trying to engage, trying to co-opt his attention. But Eli was cautious. He knew something had shifted. The boy sensed the tension, the imbalance of authenticity. Her forced coos and smiles felt alien to him, like a language he didn't understand. After the session, I pulled her aside. "You see," I said softly, my tone deceptively gentle, "he responds to genuine care, not convenience." My words were measured, but every syllable carried the weight of a subtle warning. She looked down, hiding her expression, but her hands betrayed her anxiety, twisting and untwisting in restless patterns. Over the next week, I allowed her to settle in, giving her just enough freedom to reveal her intentions. I watched every interaction, cataloged every slip. The smallest gesture, the faintest twitch, the micro-smile when she thought no one was looking, all of it became ammunition. She believed she was charming her way back into Eli's life, but she was laying herself bare instead. Then came the pivotal moment. I mentioned a new investment plan for Eli, a trust fund structured in layers, legally complex, with conditions she could not bypass. Her reaction was subtle but telling. A flicker of greed, a tiny tightening of her jaw, a glance toward the documents as if calculating her next move. That flicker was the confirmation I needed. Her priorities had not changed. She had returned for the money, nothing else. I started planting seeds, small suggestions to gauge her reactions. Mentions of guardianship laws, legal oversight, trustee conditions. Each comment was carefully worded, almost casual, but everyone tested her instincts, her true desires. She responded predictably. Overeager inquiries, subtle attempts to negotiate, gentle manipulations disguised as concern. Each attempt I noted, stored, and planned around. Every night I reviewed her behavior, every word, every glance. Her lies were fragile, her veneer thin. And I knew, with a clarity that chilled me, that the moment I chose to act would not be the start of chaos. It would be the culmination of meticulous observation and precise orchestration. Eli's world, protected and carefully nurtured, would remain untouched. Her greed, her betrayal would become the chains that ensnared her. As I watched her leave for the day, I inhaled deeply, savoring the quiet tension that had settled between us. She thought she was navigating a return. I knew she was walking into a trap of her own making. Every action, every word, every gesture had been mapped. And soon, very soon, her ambition would meet the full measure of the consequences she had so long evaded. The following days were a delicate dance, a chess game where every move she made was predictable, yet revealing. I let her think she was gaining ground. I allowed her to prepare meals for Eli, to read to him, to fold his clothes just so. She believed these small gestures were bridging the gap, building her redemption. But in reality, I was studying the rhythm of her deceit. Every smile she forced, every attempt at affection betrayed the truth. She wanted control, and control meant money. Nothing else. One afternoon, I handed her a stack of documents, casually mentioning that Eli's trust fund had layers she could not touch without oversight. "Everything is structured for his protection," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. She glanced through the papers, nodding as if understanding, but her eyes betrayed her impatience. The flicker there was unmistakable, a combination of frustration and greed. It was small, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to me it screamed volumes. That night, I stayed up in my office, reviewing every conversation we had over the past week. I cataloged her tone, her hesitations, her attempts to subtly manipulate Eli. I made detailed notes on her body language, the timing of her smiles, even the way she blinked when confronted with boundaries. Everything was a thread, and I was weaving it into a trap that would soon be inescapable. The first real test came when I mentioned a planned family meeting with the lawyers overseeing Eli's trust. "It's just to make sure everything is clear," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She reacted instantly, her eyes widening slightly, then narrowing. She smiled too quickly, forcing calm over an inner panic she couldn't hide. She asked questions, probing for loopholes, looking for any hint that she could bypass the legal constraints. And there it was again, the unmistakable hunger for control. I decided to introduce another layer to the plan. I began recording her subtle admissions, offhand remarks about what she would do if she had access, casual comments about her time away, moments of faint guilt she tried desperately to mask. Each word, each pause, each almost confession was catalogued meticulously. The more she spoke, the more evidence I had. Every statement, carefully documented, would later become the cornerstone of her undoing. During this time, I maintained a calm exterior. To Eli, I was the consistent, safe presence, the father who protected his world. To her, I was patient, almost passive, but always observing. She believed she was co-parenting, regaining her role. What she didn't see was the precision in my silence, the power in my calm. My revenge was not going to be loud. It would be surgical, invisible until the moment it struck. One evening, she stayed later than usual, lingering near Eli's room after I had put him to bed. I noticed her hesitation at the door, the way she peered inside, trying to gauge his reaction. I approached softly. "He sleeps well when he feels safe," I said, almost conversational. Her lips tightened. I just want to be part of his life," she murmured. But even in that plea, there was an undertone I could not ignore, the unspoken calculation, the subtle weighing of opportunity against risk. That was the final piece. Her greed, her betrayal, and her desire to reclaim what she had abandoned were now fully exposed. Every day had added clarity, every interaction had deepened my understanding of her motives. The stage was set. Eli remained untouched, protected by my foresight. And she, blinded by ambition and self-interest, was walking directly into the snare I had prepared. The moment I had been waiting for arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. It was a weekday morning, ordinary on the surface, but every detail had been orchestrated. I had requested a meeting with the family lawyer under the pretense of reviewing Eli's educational fund, a topic she would find irresistible. She arrived, confident, polished, her smile perfectly practiced. She believed she was negotiating her way back into Eli's world, but in reality she was stepping into a controlled environment where every word she spoke could, and would, be used against her. I let her speak first, her voice smooth, almost convincing. She recounted her absence, her struggles, her supposed regrets. Her performance was professional, but I noticed every slip, the way she referred to access instead of care, how she mentioned financial decisions almost casually, as if entitlement outweighed affection. I nodded along, calm, composed, creating the illusion of empathy. Meanwhile, hidden cameras and my detailed notes ensured every incriminating nuance was captured. When the lawyer began to ask procedural questions, she stumbled slightly, betraying irritation beneath the veneer of cooperation. She tried to deflect, to sidestep, to guide the conversation toward hypothetical scenarios that hinted at financial gain. Each attempt was gently but firmly countered by the lawyer, guided by the groundwork I had meticulously prepared. I watched as her confidence faltered, just slightly, imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. But I was paying attention, every second, every pause, every forced smile. Then came the subtle shift, the moment where patience turned into action. I calmly presented a series of documents showing past attempts she had made to influence trustees and manipulate financial advisors. She froze, a flicker of fear passing through her eyes before she masked it with a polite, rehearsed expression. Her voice was tight as she tried to justify herself, but the law and the evidence was now completely aligned against her. "I never wanted to hurt him," she said, almost in a whisper, trying to regain the moral high ground. I listened, my face neutral, letting the weight of her own words settle into the room. The lawyer glanced at me, silently confirming what I already knew. Everything was documented, everything was airtight. The betrayal, the abandonment, the calculated self-interest, it was all undeniable. Eli, of course, remained blissfully unaware. He played with his toys in the corner, the innocence of his world untouched by the legal and emotional storm unfolding around him. My focus had always been on protecting him, on ensuring that his life remained undisturbed. The revenge was never about cruelty. It was about justice, about reclaiming what she had no right to, about ensuring that her selfish choices bore the consequences they deserved. By the end of that meeting, she understood, truly understood, that her return was meaningless without genuine repentance and without adherence to the boundaries set by law and morality. Her desire for financial control had been exposed, her manipulations documented, and her influence over Eli curtailed permanently. I watched as she left the office, shoulders tense, expression carefully composed, but with a shadow I knew would linger, the shadow of accountability. Later that evening, I reflected on the process. Revenge, I realized, was not about vindictiveness or rage. It was about clarity, strategy, and precision. Every small action, every observed slip, every recorded word had culminated in a resolution that was not loud, not theatrical, but absolute. Eli's world remained intact, my conscience clear, and the balance restored. In quiet moments, I would sometimes hear her laughter on the phone, talking about her plans, oblivious to how close she had come to losing control completely. And I would smile, silently, knowing that patience, strategy, and observation had done more than anger ever could. The weeks that followed were deceptively calm. She tried subtly to regain influence, sending texts filled with hollow concern, offering gifts that felt more like bribes, suggesting outings she thought would endear her to Eli. But I had built walls not just of law, but of observation and structure. Every interaction she attempted was carefully monitored. Every word, every gesture catalogued. I never reacted openly, never allowed her to sense fear or impatience. Calmness was my weapon, invisibility my shield. One afternoon, she invited herself over, claiming Eli missed her. I agreed, of course, because refusing outright would have seemed petty. But I had prepared. Cameras, hidden microphones, and a precise itinerary ensured that the encounter would be under my control. She walked in, perfume sharp and overwhelming, hair perfectly styled, a smile that had been polished for decades. She immediately moved toward Eli, but I interjected gently, keeping physical space between them. She attempted to coerce him with sugary words and manufactured warmth. Eli, with his autistic sensitivity, sensed tension immediately. He backed away slightly, gripping his toy, a subtle signal I had learned to interpret over countless hours of observation. I watched her, observing how she processed his reaction, how her confident posture wavered ever so slightly. That hesitation was all I needed. It confirmed that my previous actions had instilled boundaries she could not ignore. During the visit, she tried to probe me with indirect questions about the estate, the financial plans, and Eli's future. I responded calmly, precisely, never over-explaining, letting her frustration build quietly. Each attempt she made to assert control or test boundaries only reinforced the narrative I had carefully constructed. She had lost her position, and it could not be regained through charm or manipulation. By evening, she had grown visibly restless. The facade of confidence was cracking. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress, her voice occasionally pitched too high, betraying irritation beneath the polite exterior. I remained composed, letting every tiny misstep speak louder than any argument I could make. After she left, I reviewed every recording, every note, every observation. It was clear she was trying to reclaim what she had never rightfully earned, but the gap between her intentions and reality was widening. I realized then that true revenge does not always involve confrontation or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it is the quiet, constant, invisible presence of justice that haunts those who believe they are untouchable. The next phase required patience. I had to ensure that the financial safeguards, legal oversight, and social boundaries remained airtight. I scheduled additional consultations with the trustees, updating them on her movements and intentions. Every suggestion she made for changes in Eli's financial planning was countered with documents, evidence, and professional recommendations she could not dispute. I was constructing an invisible web, a network of control and protection that she could not penetrate without exposing herself completely. It was during one of these consultations that I felt the full weight of strategy over emotion. Watching professionals, people who had no personal investment in the drama, methodically enforce boundaries, made me realize how meticulous observation, documentation, and calm intelligence could be more powerful than anger or impulse. I had learned to convert resentment into calculation, betrayal into leverage. And in the quiet moments after the meetings, when Eli played peacefully in his room, I allowed myself a rare sigh of relief. The storm had not yet ended, but its trajectory had been altered irrevocably. She might try again, she might push, but she would always encounter barriers she could not circumvent. My patience had transformed into quiet authority, my strategy into protective equilibrium. Months passed, and her attempts became increasingly desperate. She sent gifts that Eli refused, invitations he politely declined, and messages that grew sharper, more demanding. But I did not react. I maintained distance while watching, listening, recording every interaction. Her arrogance had not faded. Instead, it had mutated into frustration, a quiet rage barely contained beneath forced civility. Each failed attempt was a small, satisfying confirmation. Her power over us was gone irretrievably. One evening, she showed up unannounced, claiming urgent matters about Eli's trust fund. I had expected this. The moment she arrived, I calmly guided her to the living room where I had strategically placed hidden microphones and a second camera. She began her usual spiel, but the energy in the room was different this time. Her confidence faltered under my quiet scrutiny. She tried to intimidate, to manipulate with words, but every tactic was anticipated. I did not respond with anger. I responded with documentation. I slid a folder across the table, neatly organized with letters, legal notices, financial statements, and time-stamped logs of every previous interaction. I explained in calm, precise tones that any attempt to interfere with Eli's finances would not only be futile, but could also result in legal consequences. Her face, usually so composed, betrayed a flicker of panic. She opened her mouth to argue, but the weight of evidence and preparation silenced her. This was not just about finances. It was about control, justice, and the recognition of boundaries she had long violated. I had spent months preparing this moment, and every detail mattered. The room, the lighting, even the positioning of the furniture, all orchestrated to convey authority, calm, and inevitability. There was no room for her theatrics here. She left that evening, quieter than ever, but I knew this was not the end. Her desperation would continue to grow. And that was when I began the next phase, social leverage. I reached out subtly to mutual acquaintances, friends of the family, and professionals she respected. Without making any false claims or exaggerations, I allowed the truth, her abandonment, her opportunism, her manipulation, to become evident. Reputation, once untouchable, began to subtly erode. The real turning point came when she attempted to publicly challenge a minor financial decision concerning Eli. I had anticipated this and arranged a preemptive response with the trustees. When she arrived at the meeting, prepared to assert dominance, she found the board already fully informed, professional, and united in support of the decisions I had carefully documented. Her face paled. Her voice trembled slightly as she tried to argue, but it was clear she had lost not only control but credibility. In that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge is not always about dramatic gestures or public humiliation. True revenge, the kind that lingers in the mind long after the storm has passed, is about dismantling the illusion of power. It is the quiet satisfaction of watching someone's confidence erode against walls they cannot scale, all without a single word shouted in anger. Eli, meanwhile, thrived. He felt secure, respected, and protected. His world, carefully structured and supported, was unshakable. He did not need to witness her failures. He only needed to feel safe, and that sense of safety was my ultimate victory. I understood then that patience, observation, and strategy could accomplish more than any impulsive act of anger ever could. By this stage, her attempts had grown almost comical, though I refused to laugh aloud. She tried subtle manipulation through mutual contacts, leaving messages that hinted at nostalgia, guilt, and supposed regret. But I had already anticipated every angle. Every word she sent, every attempt to charm or threaten, was meticulously recorded, catalogued, and used to construct an unassailable narrative of her betrayal. One afternoon, she attempted a more audacious move. She showed up at Eli's therapy center, claiming she wanted to discuss his progress. I had been forewarned by the staff. My quiet network of observation never failed, and arrived calmly to intercept her. I escorted her to a private room and listened as she tried once again to assert her importance. She believed that her former role as mother still entitled her to authority. But now, she met not resistance born of anger, but of certainty, strategy, and preparation. I calmly explained that all communications regarding Eli would go through me and legal counsel. Every line I spoke was deliberate, measured, precise, emotionless. There was no room for negotiation or persuasion. Her face, normally composed, cracked with frustration. The tension in the room was palpable. Her perfume mixed with the faint antiseptic smell of the center, creating a sensory signature I would never forget. Later that evening, I reviewed every interaction, every subtle inflection, and planned the final phase, financial containment. The trust fund, carefully structured to protect Eli, had multiple fail-safes. I had engaged legal and financial advisors months prior, ensuring that no impulsive action on her part could disrupt what was rightfully his. Every contingency was mapped, every loophole closed. This phase required patience, invisibility, and precision, the hallmarks of revenge that leaves no trace of chaos, only the quiet inevitability of justice. Meanwhile, she became increasingly erratic. I could sense it in the messages, punctuation-heavy texts filled with implied threats and false concern. I never responded directly. Each message was another thread woven into the tapestry of her failure, all documented and ready for future reference if needed. Watching her unravel in silence while maintaining my composed exterior gave me a satisfaction that words cannot capture. It was not just about watching her fail, it was about creating conditions where the truth became self-evident to everyone around her. Friends, colleagues, and family members began to notice her instability. Invitations she expected were declined politely. Her social credibility, once solid, eroded with each misstep. The final layer of revenge was not visible to her. It was structural, subtle, inescapable. Eli, meanwhile, continued to thrive in his own world, blissfully unaware of the intricate strategy protecting him. The contrast could not have been sharper, his safety and growth against her relentless yet futile efforts. I understood that revenge is most satisfying when the target perceives normalcy, while the consequences of their actions quietly close in. By now, I had become almost invisible in her daily obsessions. She did not see me as a threat because I did not present myself as one. But every move she made, every assumption of control, only tightened the net I had spun around her. Patience had become my most powerful tool, observation my sharpest weapon, and documentation the most unassailable shield. The final phase had begun. It was no longer about observation or containment. It was about execution, the quiet, meticulous unraveling of her influence. By now, she had exhausted every avenue of manipulation, social pressure, false narratives, guilt trips, and even hints at litigation. But the walls I had built, legal, financial, emotional, were impermeable. Every attempt bounced back, leaving her increasingly isolated and desperate. I called in my legal team to implement the final protections for Eli's inheritance. Trust agreements were reinforced, access points sealed, and contingency clauses activated. This was the moment where her dreams of reclaiming what she had abandoned would collide with reality. It had to be precise. Any misstep could weaken the impact. The entire operation was designed to allow her to attempt interference, and fail spectacularly, without me having to lift a finger in direct confrontation. She made one last, desperate attempt. She sent a personal letter claiming she had seen the error of her ways and was ready to be part of Eli's life again. The tone was manipulative, laden with emotion and calculated remorse. I read it slowly, savoring the layers of her deceit and the arrogance she carried, assuming she could manipulate me as she once had. I filed it away as evidence, a perfect demonstration of her own entitlement and misjudgment. Then came the decisive day. Through her attorney, she formally requested access to the trust fund, under the guise of supporting her son. It was the perfect setup. When her claim was reviewed, every clause, every safeguard I had anticipated came into effect. Her request was denied legally, absolutely, leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. The look of shock and disbelief on her face when she received the notice was something I will never forget, the ultimate validation of years of patience and strategy. Meanwhile, Eli thrived, unaware of the storm that had quietly passed. I watched him play in the garden, his laughter a vivid contrast to the tension that had dominated my own adult life for so long. Protecting him had required calculated restraint, meticulous planning, and a refusal to react emotionally. But seeing him safe, smiling, and secure was the quiet, satisfying victory that no drama, confrontation, or spectacle could replicate. In the aftermath, I reflected on the entire ordeal. Revenge, I realized, is not about cruelty or celebration. It is about justice, preservation, and teaching a lesson without losing one's own dignity. She remained in her bubble of delusion, believing she could manipulate reality, while in truth, every action she took only confirmed her failures. Friends and family had witnessed her unraveling subtly, and she had no one to blame but herself. I never gloated. I never announced my triumph. Everything unfolded according to the strategy I had set in motion. Quietly, systematically, she had been stripped of influence over Eli, and the consequences were entirely of her own making. There was no spectacle, no vindictive outburst, only the calm, unyielding certainty of justice. The lesson was clear: patience and strategy outweigh impulse and emotion. Power lies in observation, in preparation, and in the subtle orchestration of consequences. And most importantly, protecting what you love requires not rage, but controlled intelligence, the kind that allows your actions to speak louder than words ever could. By the time the dust settled, life had returned to an uneasy calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes after storms, the quiet that carries weight. Eli's world was untouched, his routines uninterrupted, his happiness intact. I watched him grow, little by little, free from the chaos his mother had tried to drag him into. That was the real victory, the one no lawsuit, no confrontation, no viral story could ever measure. Her presence faded. She tried a few minor attempts to reinsert herself, calls, messages, fleeting appearances at social events. But each effort was met with polite distance, a wall built not out of cruelty, but of careful preparation. Every time she tried to bend reality, she found it unyielding. It was as if the universe itself had sided with patience, with prudence, with calculated justice. Her frustration became almost tangible, an invisible tension that followed her wherever she went. I spent hours reflecting on the journey, the initial betrayal, the shock, the humiliation, and the painstaking process of reclaiming control. I realized how vital it had been to stay calm, to observe without reacting, to strategize instead of lashing out. Hatred, in its rawest form, is destructive, but when channeled with discipline, it becomes a force for protection, for measured correction, for safeguarding what truly matters. Eli, blissfully unaware of the intricate web that had been woven for his protection, became my anchor. Every laugh, every innocent question, every smile reminded me why the patience had been worth it. I had denied her not just access to the money, but to the influence, the manipulation, and the control she craved. And in doing so, I preserved my integrity, my dignity, and most importantly, his innocence. I did not celebrate. There were no triumphal declarations or dramatic confrontations. Instead, I found a quiet satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served without compromising my own principles. Revenge had been exacted not through impulsive actions, but through foresight, discipline, and strategic patience. Every consequence she faced was the direct result of her own choices, a truth she could not deny. Looking back, I understood a profound lesson. Revenge is not about spectacle or emotional satisfaction in the moment. It is about foresight, restraint, and intelligence. It is about ensuring that those who betray you cannot touch what you cherish most while remaining morally upright yourself. That is a rare form of power, the kind that is invisible to the world but profoundly effective in its impact. In the end, I walked away with peace rather than anger, wisdom rather than bitterness. Eli thrived, the bond between us strengthened, and the shadows of betrayal faded into a distant memory. The lesson was not just for her, but for me as well. Control your emotions, plan your actions, protect what is sacred, and let life itself deliver the consequences. Her $3. 9 million ambition had failed spectacularly, but the real triumph was intangible, quiet, resilient, and deeply personal. Justice had been served, not with noise or spectacle, but with precision, patience, and the unwavering certainty that the morally grounded will always endure. As I watched Eli sleep that night, the soft rise and fall of his chest, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Revenge had been necessary, but love and protection had been victorious. And that, far more than money or vindication, was the story worth telling.